Good to be with you for another meditation. You might remember that in our worship services, we've been following the lectionary cycle, and we've been in the Gospel of Luke. And we're now following Jesus and the disciples as Jesus makes his way to Jerusalem. And on his way to Jerusalem, he has some hard conversations with his disciples. That is, he has hard conversations with us, trying to teach us, trying to prepare us for what this life as a Christian, as this life of faith is going to entail. You might remember that Jesus told us you got to hate your mother and father if you want to follow him, that you've got to pay attention to the one that you don't see and not just the ones that are around you. This week, Jesus tells a very disturbing parable. The parable is in the 16th chapter of Luke. It's the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. You might remember the parable. We're introduced to a rich man who wears rich clothing, who eats sumptuously in his house. Outside his gate, we are told, is Lazarus, this poor man who sits outside his gate, who eats crumbs, who has a body full of sores, who's taken advantage of by others, by dogs. And then Jesus continues in the parable, he tells us that both of them died, the rich man and Lazarus. And the rich man ends up in Hades, Jesus says. Now, Hades is not hell. Hades is just the land of the dead. Lazarus, on the other hand, lands in paradise, which is the land of the living. And the rich man cannot understand why he ended up where he was. And he asked Lazarus for help, but of course Lazarus could not. And he has a conversation about Abraham. And Abraham says, the gulf between us is too wide to do anything about it now. The rich man tells Abraham, well, at least send somebody back to tell my brothers so they don't have the same fate. Abraham says they know all they need to know. They've had the prophets. They've had the scriptures. There's a lot in this parable to try to unlock. First, Lazarus, the poor man, has a name. We know him, right? Lazarus is described in great detail. The rich man, on the other hand, we have no idea what his name is. He could be anybody, he could be you, right? But Jesus knows the poor man intimately. Jesus knows Lazarus very well. You could say that this parable is a parable of the Magnificat that we find from Mary in Luke. We could say that this parable is a story about the Sermon on the Plain that we have in Luke, that is the Beatitudes, where there's this reversal of fortune. Again, there's a lot to unpack. Now, why did the rich man end up in the land of the dead? We're not told that he was inherently evil. We're not told that he did anything bad to Lazarus. He did not withhold things, nor did he give things. Pretty much, the man never saw Lazarus. He did not know the poor man by name as Jesus did. He did not see and was not aware of his surroundings. So is this a parable about the boundaries that we place around ourselves? Is it a parable about who we see, who we don't see, who we know by name and who we don't know by name? I don't know. I don't really see this parable as a story of heaven and hell. I find it a story about what life is to be about right now. That's a parable, right? A parable is about life right here and right now and how we experience it. So I think maybe Jesus is telling us, pay attention to your surroundings. Don't build boundaries around yourselves. Be open to everyone that is there. Get to know one another. Take care of one another. Because God's plan is that everybody lives in the land of the living. That's what creation's all about. So I invite you to continue to wrestle with this parable. It may be saying something completely different to you, and I'd love to hear it. We'll see you next week.